Hello, lovely listeners. This is Mary Wild. Welcome to my Patreon channel. I wanted to create a space where I'm able to produce more content, essentially, and spontaneously react to cultural hot topics that come up, have a platform for interviewing really exciting people, interesting people, do lectures, provide a space for the lectures that I deliver at the Freud Museum. And yeah, so I came up with this idea to launch a Patreon. Okay, so first things first, for those of you who are not familiar with my work, I just want to give you a brief introduction. So my name is Mary Wild. I am the creator of the Projections lecture series, essentially promoting psychoanalysis for film interpretation. And I tend to approach the film medium as a projective test, like a Rorschach ink blot, in the sense that the raw material of film lends itself to a multitude of different interpretations. And so my teachings on psychoanalysis as a theoretical framework has the aim of excavating meaningful subjective associations that viewers might find in the films that they watch. My favorite topics to cover are themes like cinematic representations of the unconscious, the death drive, mental illness, identity, etc. I also tend to gravitate towards auteur studies, so you'll be getting a lot of that on this channel. So my favorite auteurs include Sofia Coppola, David Lynch, Darren Aronofsky, Lars von Trier, Gaspar Noé, Roman Polanski, Woody Allen. I could go on. I really love auteur studies for the reason that I like occupying the mindset of a director. And watching a lot of films by one filmmaker sort of gives me an opportunity to almost like inhabit their mind, like really take on their vision of the world and understand how they look at things and what preoccupies them, what's constantly on their mind that just keeps coming back and manifesting on the film material. And that's interesting to me because I think a lot of these artists are working through some unconscious material, but they feel compelled to come back again and again. And there's like this repetitive pattern that emerges in their films, but that gets interpreted as a language. We instantly know when we're watching a David Lynch film because there's certain little symbols that keep cropping up across his filmography. Sigmund Freud said that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. That is to say, if you want to know someone's innermost motivations that they're not aware of, you simply have to ask them about their dreams and the way they describe their dreams. And this gives us a little glimpse into that internal psyche, that world that is otherwise inaccessible. Jacques Lacan said that the unconscious is structured like a language, that people reveal themselves in the words that they use, the way that they relate to certain signifiers, their own positioning within a discourse. This all gives us clues about their unconscious inner workings. I'd like to kind of add to that another layer and say that the unconscious is revealed across an auteur's preoccupations, the language that they create, the cinematic language that we come to recognize and identify with reveals a lot about the unconscious mind of a filmmaker. So that's why I love auteur studies. My favorite genres are science fiction, horror, documentary, the ontological thriller, and murder mysteries. In terms of the way I want to approach this Patreon channel, I do not assume that anyone listening has prior knowledge. I want this to be really inclusive in the true meaning of the word, not just to throw like a soundbite or a buzzword around. But I really want people to feel that they can come to this Patreon channel and not feel excluded by fancy language, by academic jargon. You can come here and rest assured that you're going to learn. you're going to enrich your own grab bag of knowledge. You're going to add to what you already know. And if you're a film lover, then these tools will stand you in good stead, help to enrich your experience of spectatorship. I find that psychoanalysis has been a gift to me because learning about concepts and becoming familiar with a psychoanalytically oriented perspective has given me like a deeper appreciation of so many films. And I felt like I could watch a film more than once and it bestows multiple gifts upon me because I'm reading it in a different way. So one singular film has the potential to enrich in a much more expanded way than I ever thought possible. So I'm deriving a lot more meaning from the patterns that I'm recognizing in the films that I watch. And I love that. So just rest assured that no prior knowledge will be assumed on my part. You can enter this space and feel like your approach to the way that you view films, that's valid, that's unique to you, and that says something about you, and it's interesting. So in that way, I really distinguish myself from film criticism. What I'm trying to do here is teach and promote film interpretation, which is a very different type of practice. So film criticism is more about seeking like an authoritative voice within the film discourse. Film critics might aspire to come up with like the definitive reading of a film, or they might want to maybe denounce certain opposing perspectives, but that's not my aim. I'm not trying to achieve the highest level of knowledge. I guess I'm more like a tarot reader in the way that a tarot reader might draw cards and they're completely at random, and the aim is to construct a narrative between them and search for a potential of meaning. And that's what I do. I like to think about film more in that fluid way. And also my own reading is only manifestation of my own projection. Whatever it is I'm projecting unconsciously says more about me, than it does about the film. Hence why I called my lecture series, which debuted at the Freud Museum London in 2012, the Projections Lecture Series, because that's the thing, it's about individual projections that often come together and form maybe a collective projection if there's a group identification. So I wanted to make that distinction in this introduction and welcome message to my Patreon channel. But also I want to tell you that psychoanalysis means so much to me, and what I'm doing here is really an attempt at pop psychoanalysis. Now, what do I mean by that? Psychoanalysis often gets thought of as like an elitist school of knowledge, where it's something that only experts know about, or only, very qualified people have the right to speak about. Or sometimes it just gets thought of as pseudoscience by psychiatrists or CBT practitioners. But I really want to challenge that. I think that there are a lot of really valuable dimensions to psychoanalysis that stand to enrich our life. Psychoanalysis acknowledges emotional, mental layers to us that simply get ignored in some other schools of thought, like the unconscious. That's the domain of psychoanalysis, and I think we would all benefit and stand to bring meaning to the suffering that we experience if we were able to become educated on psychoanalysis, not just individually, but collectively. There's so many things that happen, and life sometimes feels so chaotic and uncertain and weird and uncanny and alienating. But I firmly believe that knowing about psychoanalysis, learning about it, It's not going to make your problems disappear. This is not a magic pill. It's not a snake oil pitch or anything. Psychoanalysis will not diminish suffering, but what it will do is it will bring about a sense of peace that comes with achieving meaning through suffering. So it's more like a philosophical way of life. I believe that if people learned psychoanalysis, they could self-analyze. If you don't have the resources or the desire or the time or the interest to go and speak to a psychoanalyst, that doesn't mean that you can't benefit from what psychoanalysis has to teach. You can simply read about it, become familiar with it, and apply it to your own life and self-analyze. That's what Sigmund Freud did. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, he invented this theory, but that started with self-analysis, and that started with observing his own surroundings and talking to his patients and exchanging ideas with colleagues. That is a real life's journey, and nothing stops any of us from following in his footsteps. I'd like to think that I've done that. When I say that my attempt is to achieve a kind of pop psychoanalysis, what I'm saying there is that I want to make psychoanalysis popular. So bring psychoanalysis to the people, of a kind of populist approach to psychoanalysis. I want to kind of break down those barriers of elitism and access that surround psychoanalysis. I want it to be a school of thought that we rely on, as ordinary people, to help us achieve meaning through our suffering, to help us better understand dynamics that exist around us that never get spoken about because they're taboo, that help us to reassure ourselves and each other when things go really wrong. So there's that element of populism when I say pop psychoanalysis, but also pop psychoanalysis as in psychoanalysis for popular culture, because that's kind of, I guess you could say, my expertise. I love movies. I watch everything. I watch everything from the sublime to the ridiculous, and one day I could go from watching Andrei Tarkovsky film and then watch an episode of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I do not discriminate. I believe in the power of observation, and the poet can find meaning anywhere. I think it was Werner Herzog who said that. But also Quentin Tarantino, he is a very accomplished cinema auteur, but he didn't go to film school. He worked at a video store in Los Angeles, and he watched everything. That was his education. He watched everything he could get his hands on at the video store. And he's still like that to this day. He will watch everything. Stanley Kubrick said, if it can be thought of, it can be filmed. And I would go further than that and add to that and say, whatever it is that has been filmed can be analyzed and meaning can be derived. And there's no caveat there. That applies to everything, low and high culture. So I love pop culture. I find pop culture interesting. I'm constantly observing the way that audiences respond, and I find some reactions interesting, and I have some opinions. I guess you could say this is a space also for me to work through puzzling, perplexing moments in pop culture. And I rely, again, on psychoanalysis to do that. So all of these things have multiple layers of meaning for me. I hope that you enjoy what it is that I'm going to bring on this platform. Now, you might have already come across my work if you've attended one of my lectures at the Freud Museum. I mean, I've been collaborating with the Freud Museum London now for nearly 10 years, and we've developed a lecture series together called Projections. I've delivered many, many, many courses for them in person, pre-pandemic, live in the flesh at the museum, at the venue with audiences. Many times my courses sold out. It was a very popular lecture series when it was live. But I've been really surprised and heartwarmed to see that post-pandemic, and when the pandemic first started, we moved all of my courses online to make them accessible for people who were in lockdown or quarantining, and also people around the world. I mean, I used to get feedback pre-pandemic from people around the world who knew about my lecture series, but they were not in London, where I'm based and where the museum is. So they couldn't attend in person. And they often would say, is there a way to release the recording? You know, I'd really like to follow along. But then when that pandemic struck, we really didn't have a choice. We had to rely on technology. We had to transfer this content onto the internet. And I delivered my lectures via Zoom. So two things happened. Firstly, because it was online, it broke down the kind of geographical barriers, and people around the world were able to follow along and attend. So it really opened up our audience, and we were able to extend our reach in a way that we never imagined would be possible. But at the same time, I doubled my output. I was able to just produce more because it was, you know, we didn't have the limitations of space in the calendar and, you know, etc. So we were simply just able to put out more content. So I've been so lucky because during the pandemic, I've been able to work more and I've been able to reach more people. And so if you have attended those lectures and you've found this place now, this Patreon channel, I'm so excited that you are here. And thank you for following my work. And I hope you really enjoy what I bring on this space. I've also done work in the podcast world. So I co-host a podcast called Projections Podcast. The name is a nod to my lecture series. And my co-host Sarah Cleaver and I upload episodes around themes. You know, we program films that are connected in motif or tone or theoretical concept. We have more than 60 episodes at the time of recording now. It was Sarah's idea to start the podcast. She really introduced me to the podcast world, so I'm very grateful to her. And we've had some really interesting conversations around films that we analyze from a psychoanalytic perspective. So you can find us anywhere that you enjoy podcasts. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Castbox, Podbean. But I also I'm a regular contributor now to the Evolution of Horror podcast, which is hosted and produced by the extraordinary Mike Munzer. He was kind enough to invite me as a regular guest for each of the seasons that he curated. And when it came time to the season on body horror and psychological horrors, he proposed an idea and he said, would you be interested in contributing a regular little spot, like a little mini segment that would appear in the majority of the episodes in the season? It's kind of like your little corner where you psychoanalyze the films that I'll be kind of deep diving on with my other guests. And so that's how Wild About Horror was born. That has proven to be really popular as well. I've been so lucky to receive really nice feedback from listeners saying that they enjoy Wild About Horror and that it's a good addition to the wonderful podcast that Mike creates. So I've been really honored in that way to be able to work with good people and develop myself and learn new skills in new industries and new realms. And so I was still left with a little burning desire to have yet another space to touch on those little things that still kind of are there on my mind, and they also need a home. And so that's what this Patreon channel is all about. So now I'm going to get into what exactly you'll be getting if you become a subscriber. Members who sign up will pay $5 per month, and what they get is one upload per week, and that will be consistent. a new upload will appear in your feed from me every week. I'm aiming to have at least like 50 uploads a year minimum. I'm giving myself a 2-week grace if I go on holiday or if there's an emergency or something. But you will get a minimum of 50 uploads per year. So you'll often hear from me in the form of a lecture where I am teaching a theoretical concept within psychoanalysis in relation to cinema or pop culture. Other times there will be an interview. So I've already got a really interesting lineup of guests that I've pre-recorded. Other times I might just observe something going on out there in the cultural space, and it might make me think deeply about it. I might go into some profound state of analysis. This sometimes happens, and I kind of call it falling down a rabbit hole. And my husband, Paul, he kind of gently teases me about those times where I become obsessed about something and I need to research everything about it, or it's just something that dominates my mind, And so I thought having a space like this would be a nice outlet and a nice opportunity to share my thoughts. And I also want to say that, I pride myself in taking a divergent perspective on things. I don't want to say that I'm a contrarian just to, be a troll or anything. But one thing that I know about myself for sure is that I don't tend to follow the crowd. I'd like to aspire to be, and I think I have it in me to be like a really independent thinker. I like and admire iconoclasts, people who really go against the norm, provocateurs. Those people are my heroes. Almost without fail. Yeah, sure, sometimes they might be obnoxious, but I think we need provocateurs. We really desperately need them to advance knowledge and to keep things interesting, stir things up, get us out of our comfort zone. Because I have read enough about group psychology from a psychoanalytic perspective to know how dangerous it can get when everyone is just identifying with each other and there's like a consensus and we're all in a bubble and no one has the courage to speak up because no one wants the target on their back of being different. And I don't have that fear. I really don't. I don't mind being the odd one out. And I want this space to reflect that, a type of thinking that challenges the status quo, whilst always being respectful, and I think that's possible. And I will have guests on here that I share a lot in common with. And sometimes, for the sake of kind of keeping things fresh for myself as well, maybe I'll bring on a guest who 100% disagrees with my take. That will be an interesting conversation, and that'll be something interesting to listen to. So these are all things that I aspire this space to be. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be on this journey. I've thought about it for a long time. I went back and forth in my mind about what I wanted to do here. I'm happy, it makes me so happy to create content. That's what I love to do. And I hope you feel my passion, to feel that enthusiasm, really. So just going back to the price point for a moment, I want to make clear that there are no tiers of membership. There's just one flat fee of $5 a month. Every single person who signs up has access to everything. And the reason I wanted to do that is because a lot of us who are interested in film, we might be paying multiple subscription fees for streaming services, and I just wanted to kind of be within a price point range that felt affordable for people, and I didn't want to make this like a financial burden for anyone. Okay, so that bit of housekeeping is done, and I finally just want to talk about my delivery because I've thought about this as well. The type of speech that I employ in different spaces might vary. So, for example, when I'm teaching my courses, I might err more on the formal side. Sometimes I'll crack the odd joke or something. It's never too serious, but it's a little bit more kind of formal, and I'm in lecturing mode, and you feel it. Or if you're listening to my podcast, it's very colloquial, it's very casual. I'm talking to my friend and co-host, Sarah, and we're just talking as friends do, bouncing ideas back and forth. We certainly get the feedback that our friendship comes through the way that we employ our language together. So for Mike's podcast, that's much more highly produced. When he first asked me to do Wild About Horror, I really thought about how I wanted to speak, and I came up with this style that sort of evolved over time as I got more comfortable narrating, and it's all scripted. Everything you hear on Wild About Horror is scripted by me. I write those pieces and then I perform them. So there is a huge element of performance involved in the Wild About Horror segments for Mike's podcast. And I like that. That's something that I did deliberately. I wanted there to be that performance. So I have been told by some listeners that my voice on there sounds a bit like ASMR, a little bit breathy. I got told I sounded sultry, which I really like. That's a nice compliment. And I thought about how I would approach my space here, and I wanted to feel more spontaneous, adventurous, like we're going on an exploration, maybe confronting the unknown a little bit more. Hence why I say that occasionally you will hear from me in uploads where I'm reacting to something that's been happening that week. And I want that to be really well and alive in these broadcasts, keeping things exciting and daring, a little bit provocative, I like those things. So that's really it. That's all I wanted to tell you. This is my introduction to the Patreon channel, and I hope that you'll come on this journey with me. There'll never be a dull moment, I promise you. And I put the tagline in my description that I want this to be ASMR for intellectual guttersnipes. And I stand by that. I want this to be soothing listening for daring thinkers. But guttersnipe in the sense that if you're anything like me, then you might feel like a little bit of a misfit, maybe a little misunderstood, a little mischievous. I've just actually looked up the definition of guttersnipe, and it literally just means street urchin, stray, outcast, orphan. I like those definitions because I'm applying them in a little bit of a radical way, because I see the discourse out there wanting to encompass everyone in it. And some of us just don't feel we belong. Some of us just don't feel like we relate or identify with what's being said and done in that mainstream landscape. Some of us might feel truly an outcast or alienated or orphaned, motherless and fatherless in a philosophical way, where we feel like we've had to fend for ourselves in the kind of ideological space. And I think that's a cool thing. I think that's to be celebrated. I don't want to turn that around. I don't want to interfere with that process. And I don't want us to feel like that's a negative. I celebrate that truly, from my heart. I never want to grow out of being a gutter snipe. So if you feel that way, then you might find some interesting things in this space. And follow your gut. Hit that subscribe button and join me. I hope you have a really good time here, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.